Mhm. Well, hello everyone. Sorry for the delay. Welcome to SBA Homes Policy in Action series. Specifically, this one's going to be on the inclusionary housing ordinance. I'm really excited to be hosting this today. Thank you all for coming. Today, we're going to be talking about affordable housing everywhere, and inclusionary housing rights. My name is Manuel Salazar, and I am the Housing Production and Planning Associate with SBA Home. I'm really glad you're joining us this afternoon. Today, as I said before, we're going to be digging into the inclusionary housing ordinances, what they are, how cities design and implement them, and kind of really what it takes to get them right. We're going to be looking into a couple of key policy examples that, have struck the right balance, specifically in the city of Morgan Hill. And we're going to be creating, you know, meaningful discussions around how do you get these policies right, how do you craft them, and how do you make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck. Uh, the Policy in Action series is a monthly informal discussion, convening houses to engage on hot housing topics. And every month we select a topic of current, relevancy. We try to bring, experts to give a brief presentation, and then from there we kind of want to open up the conversation to dialogue for all of you lovely folks. So please, as the presentations are going along, make sure that, we are engaging in questions and saving our questions for the end for the Q&A session. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the traditional and ancestral unceded territories of the Olane, Moakme, Ramaytush, Alone, Pemia Nation, and Amamatsun, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that we are intentionally displacing from their lands who remain here in Silicon Valley and are a part of our community. Next slide. Thank you. Also, code of conduct. So some housekeeping things. Please be kind and courteous to each other. No rude or comments or personal attacks. We encourage you, as I said before, to ask questions and listen as we learn. I see. Uh, as we learn, and please remember to keep today's conversations, questions, and chat focused on our discussion topic. Next slide. And with that, I'd like to welcome two of our panelists. Today we have Joshua Abrams, who is the principal for the Community Planning Collaborative. And next slide, please. Also, John Lang, who is the Housing Director for the City of Morgan Hill. They are going to be giving you a little bit of a more general high-level overview of what the inclusionary housing ordinance is, the Grand Nexus, which is actually the study that a lot of cities in our county are utilizing to implement an inclusionary housing ordinance, as well as some general best practices of what this process looks like when it's actually put into implementation. I want to give a really brief kind of presentations and introductions for both of my speakers today. First, we have Joshua Abrams, who is the principal at the Planning Collaborative, bringing over 2 decades of experience in housing policy, land use planning, and community engagement. Skilled mediator and facilitator, he is known for building consensus around complex and often contentious issues. Joshua has developed affordable housing plans, inclusionary zoning ordinances, and nexus studies for jurisdictions across California. Recognized nationally as an expert on ADUs, he is committed to advancing affordable housing, environmental justice, and sustainability through collaborative solutions. As for John, John has been working in local government for the past 25 years, holding various roles such as analyst, economic development officer, senior management analyst, chief economics, and a whole variety of other things. He's worked for the city of San Jose and Mountain View, but John's current position is actually as the Housing and Economic Mobility Director for Morgan Hill. There, he oversees the city's housing program, homelessness services, and advances the recently adopted Elevate Morgan Hill, a mobility and advancement strategy. So with that, I'm going to stop yapping and I'm going to be turning it over to our panelists for their discussions. First, we have Josh, and Reva, can you go to the next slide, please?
Manuel, it might be. Oh, okay. There we go.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody, and it's nice to be here. So the Wi-Fi network is not allowing me to connect to Zoom, so I'm on the cellular network. Hopefully the connection is good enough, and we'll make a go. Next slide. So we'll talk a little, make sure everyone knows about what it is inclusionary. I assume you do. A couple of the questions: will inclusionary raise the cost for everyone, and will it stop new development? A few words about feasibility and a few words about fees versus units. Next slide. So what is inclusion? I think everyone knows it's next slide. It's when a developer sets aside a portion of the units, market rate units, to be affordable to lower income households. Mostly, I just want you guys to look at this map from Grounded Solutions Network that shows where it is, and you'll see it's in mostly it's California and the Northeast for the most part, but it's mostly in the really strong market areas. And there's a reason for that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Next slide. So it's important to talk about why inclusionary is important. And it's really it's kind of unique in that it doesn't take a public subsidy. For most affordable housing programs, local governments have to put in a couple $100,000 per unit. And inclusionary captures the value for when developers are building new housing and turns that into affordable housing. And it's uniquely powerful in that way. Next slide. All right, I'm going to do a couple of scenarios just to make a point here. Your realtor tells you your home will sell for about $1 million, but you really want to make $2 million because you want to retire. Can you make buyers pay $2 million? Right. Okay. So when I ask it like that, it's so silly that you're not even going to bother answering me because you don't even think it's a real question. The answer is obviously not. The next question is, your realtor tells you that you can sell your home for $1 million, assuming you get the roof repaired. The realtor estimates that it'll cost $200,000 to get it done. Oh, sorry, $20,000. You decide to hire someone from Home Depot parking lot to save a little bit of money. They mess it up, and it all ends up costing $100,000 for your roof. You come up with a great plan. You'll sell it for $1.1 million. How will that go? Okay, so the lesson here is, and when I think I phrase it like this, it should be fairly obvious that developers can't increase the cost of housing. So even if inclusionary housing reduces their revenue or adds expense or adds problems, they're not going to be able to pass those costs along to homeowners. And then let's do next slide. It's the same thing true for rental. It's a little harder to get your head around, but it's the same thing. You own an ADU. Based on the market and past experience, it'll rent for $2,000 a month. Your son's racked up $100,000 trading Bitcoin. You want to make your family whole. Can you just raise your rent to $3,000 and have it lease up in the same amount of time? And it's obviously not. And then just the last example is actually one that's exactly inclusionary. Using SB9, you build a fourplex, planning on renting the units for $2,000 each. The city tells you that one of them has to be rented for $1,000. You decide you're going to raise the rent of all of the others. Every potential renter comes in and they says they can rent comparable units for $2,000. You can't just explain that you're trying to make up the rent for other lost units. It doesn't work like that. Next slide. So, and I think there's animation on these. I don't know if it's possible to do it so there's animation. It'll become later, more important later. It's not a big deal, but so the question is, like, if you sell or rent a home, what determines what it'll sell for or rent for? And there's a thousand ways to answer this. I mean, it's like the location, the size, the amenities, however you want to approach it. But in the end, it's the hand of the market. Developers have no ability to choose that. Next slide. So they're actually what we call price. So there's two types of ways to think about this. There's price setters, and almost every other producer or seller in the world is a price setter. The producer determines the price of the good. So if Apple wants to decide how much they want to sell a new iPhone, they'll decide, do they want to price it for more and have fewer sell? Do they want to sell it more cheaply, sell more of them? But in the end of the day, Apple decides what they want to sell their phones for. Homes are one of the few things that's different. The home sellers are price takers. It's kind of a clue here, but if you think about it, try and think of something else that is where the seller is a price taker. They don't actually determine the price. I don't know if anyone wants to guess. It's kind of obvious, I think, from the clue. But the answer is, it's like auction. That's one of the few other places where the producer doesn't determine the price. So the home builders are price takers, and that's the heart of why they can't push costs through to the consumer, even if they want to, even if their costs are higher, even if they want to make up for lost revenue. Next slide. And basically, if you think about it, if in the area there's 1,000 homes for sale and you add a new development, that little blue dot there, everyone, what they do is they compare it to all of the surrounding homes and the past sales and what they think will be coming, and they expect it to be comparable. It's not a unique or singular product where you get to decide everything. It's a competitive market for resales, and only a very tiny fraction of that market is actually new sales. So that's why the home sellers are the price takers, and they can't increase their sales price. Next slide. So the developer, at the end of the day, they really only have three options. They can build something different. They could build commercial. They could build larger units. They could build a different type of product. If inclusionary only kicks in if there's 10 units, they could build 9 units. So that's one option. They have the option of not building. That's another option. But they don't have the option of charging more than people are willing to pay. Next slide. So this question is really simple. If someone tells you, will inclusionary raise the price rents for everyone else? The answer is no. It's kind of, maybe it feels confusing when you don't know real estate economics, but on a common sense level, no, I mean, and on a real estate economics level, the answer is no. They just can't raise those prices no matter what they want to do. And I have developers tell me this, like when I'm interviewing them and talking to them one-on-one, they'll say this all the time. They'll be like, this program really squeezes us because we can't just raise rents arbitrarily. But then when they go to the council meeting, they'll say, don't pass this policy, or we're just going to pass those rents, that increase on to everyone else. And sometimes if council calls on me again, I'll be like, it's the same developers who are telling you they will pass the prices in private. They told me they don't have the ability to do that. Okay, so that's a real clear no, they won't. What, next slide. But the next question, will inclusionary stop development? I wish I could say no. I wish I could give you that same clear answer. And the answer is kind of, it depends. And it depends if it's done right, and 1,000 other factors. Next slide. So let's do a different scenario. Sorry, this one starts the same, right? You decide you have to get your roof redone, and it's going to add some costs. So you hire this person, big mistake. So you march into Home Depot and ask them to sell you shingles for less. How does that go? Obviously, it doesn't go well. Or you tell the next roofer that all of your hardships and you ask for a discount. Is the roofer going to be like, well, I'm sorry, you hired someone from the Home Depot parking lot, I'll do the job for less? They're not. They're a competitive environment. They have other clients, other people they can work for. They're going to charge you the market price. Next slide. So just like the price is determined by the market, the cost to building housing is determined by the market. Next slide. And then when it comes to profits, it's actually the same thing. So if developers, they'll go to not a bank. They could go to a bank, but most likely they're going to go to a different source of funding, depending on the type of project. It could be a pension fund, or it could be an individual investor. It could be an investment trust. It could be anything. But the essence is, I'm going to say bank for simplicity. They're going to go to the bank and they're going to say, can I borrow $40 million? And I can promise you a 10% profit. And the bank is going to look at all the other things they can do with that $40 million and decide whether or not they're going to participate based on the risk or and the reward. So the bank or the investors, they're going to have their threshold. They're going to, we want 12% return, or whatever the threshold is. And so the next slide. So the profit, the minimum profit the developers need is also determined by the market. I don't know if you're sensing a pattern here. Next slide. So the fundamental rule here is that the only thing developers really control the price of is how much they'll pay for land. And that's because now the market switched, just like all the potential buyers were bidding or offering prices to buy the new home, all the potential developers are all offering prices to buy the land. So the developers actually have a fair amount of control of what they're willing to pay for land costs. Next slide. So basically, this is your master's in real estate economic development. It could have, you could say, determined by market for these first three. You have the final sales price determined by the market. You have your construction cost determined by the market. You have the desired profit determined by the market. And what's left is what the developer is willing to bid for land prices. Next slide. But let's how it looks like with inclusionary. So instead of the final sales price being $90 to $100, because some of the units are affordable, now it's $90. Construction costs stay the same. Desired profit stays the same. Now the developer can only pay $40 for land prices. Next slide. So that's fine if they can get the land. So there's a Starbucks on a month-to-month lease. It pays $5 a rent. The property owner decides it's worth selling if he can get $40. What would they sell? Winner, winner, chicken dinner. We have a deal here. Inclusionary didn't cause a problem. They could pay the $40. It moves forward. Next slide. But let's say something goes wrong. Let's say the inclusionary is set too high. It's an extra $10 off the sales price. Or let's just say the market for those market rate homes is softer, or the construction cost went up, increased, or the desired profits. Maybe construction is perceived as more riskier, other things as safer. In this scenario, now the developer, after the inclusionary requirements, can only pay $30 for land. So next slide. Same scenario, right? The owner is only willing to sell it for 40. We don't have a deal here. In fact, in this scenario, the inclusionary stopped the land from developing. It could be that the current use of the property pays too much that it's not worth selling, or it could be that the little bubble, it's a little small. It could be that there's a commercial developer that's actually willing to pay that $40 or $50, and then the residential developer is out of luck. Next slide. So how do you make it feasible? The easiest, best way is to add incentives. So this is density bonus, my high-tech illustration here. By letting developers build more, you in fact change that pro forma or the math or the equation or the how profitable it is, and you can offset some, or sometimes all, or sometimes more than all, usually some of the cost of those inclusionary requirements. Next slide. So is it that simple, right? You do your inclusionary requirement, you offer some density bonus or other incentives, and then we're done, and it's time for the next speaker. No, it's actually more complicated, and we'll touch on that. Next slide. There's actually, that line is pretty thin, at least on my screen, but market cycles, they're dynamic and they change over time. So really what's profitable today, next year might not be profitable. So you do need to review your inclusionary requirements every couple of years to make sure that you're not queuing the sad turbone, you're not pushing it so the land price that the developers can pay so low that they actually can't bid on land. And then what happens with inclusionary, the way to think about it is they're going to push this whole curve down, because development, what they can bid on the land is less. So do the next couple of slides, you'll see like you'll see the profitability go down. Click through a couple. So inclusionary percent, there's a little bit of animation if you just clicking through high-tech animation. But incentives do the opposite. They make it more profitable. So click through, there we go. And then honestly, you can go to the next one. It's even more complex than that, because some sites are marginal to begin with. And and some sites are great. So some sites you could do a high inclusionary requirement, and it's really an awesome location, easy to build, flat, rectangular, whatever the issues are, whatever made it such a good site to build, easy access. So it's not only time specific and everything, it's also site specific. And some sites have really profitable existing uses, and some sites are just a parking lot and barely making any money. Okay, next slide. So it's more like when you add an inclusionary requirement, some of it'll stay feasible, and maybe some of those really marginal sites will be not feasible, at least this year, and maybe next year those ones that were not feasible will become feasible again. Fairly complicated. Next slide. So word of caution, done wrong, inclusionary can limit supply. And I know I said, this is like a little like, you got to get your head around this. I know I said that developers can't arbitrarily push up the sales price or rent price of their units. But if we get inclusionary wrong, and lots of cities have it, and developers can't bid enough to buy land and make development happen, there'll be less supply. And when supply goes down, not on the like day-to-day level, not on the month-to-month level, but on the year-to-year, decade-to-decade level, yeah, prices go up. That's part of why we're in the mess we're in. So even if you're not sympathetic at all to developers' lot, which a lot of people aren't, we do want a lot of new supply. And done wrong, it can be a problem. Next. So will affordable housing requirements stop development? This is what we talked about, but it's good just to review. If the requirements are too high, they can be a barrier. Most programs, the way you respond is you do a feasibility study to make sure that the requirements aren't a significant barrier, and you add incentives. The research about this is a little complicated and a little hard to get right, but there's pretty good research that there's not, that in different Bay Area jurisdictions, ones with inclusionary and without, there's not a significant difference in the rate of housing production. Other places, and that's because density bonuses is mandatory in California, so the developers are getting something in return. Other places like Boston, where density bonus isn't common, and inclusionary, the Boston area that is, where inclusionary is common, but there's no incentives, you actually do see a small decrease in production because of the inclusionary. Next slide. Okay, so you do a feasibility study. That's kind of the direction we're hinting at. How do you determine that what requirements don't adversely affect development? So a feasibility, it collects a bunch of data on multiple different types of projects. It requires that looks at that minimum profitability requirements, and then looks at the profitability with and without affordable housing requirements and incentives. Next slide. So this is from a report we just did from Vacaville not that long ago. You'll see like a feasibility report might be 150 pages, but there's really only one page you care about, and it's going to be a chart. And next slide, it's going to look something like this. Okay, across the top is a bunch of different types of housing that we studied. They're called prototypes, like that's the jargon, but that just means like a type, a sample, like what is a multifamily, what is a typical multifamily, what does a development look like, what is a typical townhome development? So you can see in this chart, we said what we studied, like the townhomes, this is Vacaville, so they get bigger developments, 80 units, 3 bedrooms, 5 acres. That'll be specific for each development. We looked at the cost to build, the sale or rent price, the sales price for the rental property, whatever it is. We looked at the threshold, the required profit. The rental developments, they calculate their profit a different way. So don't worry why those numbers are so different, 7.5% versus 25%. So that's what the investors require. That's what the developers need to hit in order to make development happen. We looked at those different types of development, single family with ADUs. Actually, Vacaville has this weird thing where developers build large neighborhoods of single families for rental. So that's why you'll see that as the first prototype. But we look at how profitable it is without any requirements. So that first category, single family rental with ADUs, they needed to be able to make 7.5%. They're making 7.9%. Those things are getting built. That's great. You look at the next one, multifamily rental. They want 7.5%. It's the same investors. They want the same thing. They're like, why would we lend for multifamily when we can lend for a different thing? And you see, even under current market conditions, without any affordable requirements, they're not meeting it. They're getting 6% return. So that doesn't get built in Vacaville. Okay, jumping down to the next line, we said, what happens if 10% of the units are set aside for low income? And you can see, not surprisingly, the profitability drops. In some cases, it drops below the threshold needed to move forward. Then we said, well, let's throw back in the density bonus and a slight reduction in land value, which we won't talk about. But that's what you'd expect. Inclusionary housing over time will push down the price of developable land. And then you see it kind of in some cases cancels that out. 10% and low is a fairly moderate requirement, which is why it was not too hard to cancel it out. So this is like the chart that says it all, that says it could be, it could show it at 15%, it could show it at very low income, but this shows you whether or not a typical development at today's market conditions is likely to be a problem or not. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to go into just a few of the details. Next slide. There's really only three fundamental important things in an inclusionary ordinance. There's the percent set aside. So how many of those units need to be affordable? If it's 100 market rate units, is it 10 of them that need to be set aside? 15, 7? There's the depth of the affordability. Like, is it affordable to extremely low or very low, low, moderate? And those two things kind of work. The percent set aside and the depth of affordability work. They're almost like opposites or different sides of a seesaw. If you want those units to be affordable to extremely low income, the feasibility is going to say you can't require a lot of units to be set aside. But if you say you only want them to be set to be a moderate income, then the feasibility analysis is going to say, have a 20% set aside, because that's pretty close to market conditions, which would be a problem you probably wouldn't want to do. But those two things work in opposite. And then the last one is the alternative options. Besides offering the density bonus, another way to make inclusionary a little less painful for developers, or thinking about another way, a way you can get slightly higher requirements is to offer alternatives. And the state law says you have to offer alternatives as well. Next slide. And the most common alternative is in lieu fees. So in lieu fees, the developer, instead of building the unit, instead of performing, they put in money. The city stockpiles that money, and then they release, when they have enough money, when they have a couple $1 million, maybe more, depending on what the matching is, they'll send out a notice that says, either they'll buy land or they'll send out a notice and they say, we have $4 million, we're interested in senior housing or whatever they're interested in. And then mostly nonprofit developers will put in proposals that say, choose us, we can build. There's pros and cons to in lieu fees. One of the biggest ones is that you tend to get more units because you take those dollars and you match them with state or federal or other money, and sometimes you can structure it so you could build 2 units for every one you would have gotten if the developer built on site. Sometimes there's a little more flexibility also. You can't really tell a developer to build senior units for their inclusionary or people leaving homelessness, whatever it is. So you kind of have that. You have that flexibility, and then the developers often like it as well because it makes their life a little easier. There's disadvantages. The way you get those extra units is you get outside subsidy. So there is other public dollars that are sometimes going into it, often state or federal. So from a local level, it seems okay. And then sometimes it's hard to make those units fast enough too. Like it's hard to buy the land and collect the money and if you do it inclusionary, it'll all move a lot faster. And this is actually a value call and a local conditions call if you want the units to be produced on site or if you'd rather wait a little bit and get more units. There's not really much reason, or different units, there's not really much reason to take the fees unless the city's getting some advantage. So the question is like, at what point would you be willing to have the developer be more likely to pay the fees? Like how much is it worth for you to think about it that way? Okay, next slide. Oh, okay. I'm gonna just do a quick recap. That Inclusionary, it really is a unique and powerful tool. There's just not enough public money to build the housing we need without having private developers help. Developers can't increase the price or rent of units because of inclusionary. Inclusionary done right does not kill all development. Inclusionary done wrong, that's a bad thing. Fees are often a good option. It's making sure you set those fee levels correctly so you're getting what you want. And don't hire a roofer from the Home Depot parking lot. That won't go well. I think that's the last slide. That's it. I don't know if we want to do questions now or wait.
Why don't we go ahead and wait actually until the very end, Josh? For now, we're gonna move over to John and the city of Morgan Hill. John, are you ready?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. John Lang, I'm the Housing and Economic Mobility Director for the City of Morgan Hill. I did want to start off with just a couple comments. One, Josh's summary slide of benefit, advantages, disadvantages, I couldn't agree more. As a community that does have an inclusionary housing ordinance. It's a really good summary of the benefit and as well as some of the challenges that exist with having an IHO. The second comment I wanted to make is really acknowledging my predecessors here in Morgan Hill. Christy Thomas and Rebecca Garcia really championed the IHO policy for the city, and um, I'm just building upon a legacy that they developed, and I'm very grateful. And as we go forward and as housing laws change considerably, we are going to have to retool and rethink about our IHO and how it applies. And I will share a little bit of Morgan Hill's experience going through that process. So my presentation is about 10 to 12 slides. I want to frame it a little bit about why we did an IHO, and then I'll get into really the mechanics of our IHO and some of the challenges we have with our IHO and lessons learned. So next slide, please. And next slide. So really, Morgan Hill, just as a community, it's about 45,000 people. Approximately 75% of our residents leave our community every single day for jobs to the north. And so that's a challenge when it comes to the housing stock because many of the people that are leaving are going for much higher incomes, which is driving up the affordability in our community. But we are grounded around the 5 P's of housing: production, promotion, preservation, prevention. Obviously, we don't want people to lose their housing, and then other protections about ensuring people have pathways to stay within their housing. So this really grounds the work of our housing team here in Morgan Hill. But let's get into why an IHO. Next slide. So as I said, we're a community of about 45,000 people. It is really important to kind of understand your community. So when you look at census data for our community, we have many households and individuals that fall into the extremely low, very low, and low income. When you look at the available units that they can afford, there there is a mismatch. People's incomes relative to the units that are available in our community, there is a mismatch. So when you look at extremely low income individuals in our community, there's over 20, sorry, not 20, 2,000 families that are in an income bracket of extremely low, and we only have 130 units that actually have pricing that individuals can afford. This is the mismatch that goes on in the marketplace. Um, our housing prices, when you look at ownership units, have increased dramatically. A little over a decade ago, the average home price in Morgan Hill was just around 700,000. It's now 1.5. So there is definitely a cost to live in this community. Next slide. So one of the critical things when we talk about IHOs is, you know, Josh really spoke about the thinking about it from the developer perspective, but ultimately, an IHO is a policy. It is a policy that says we will set aside a certain percentage of units, new constructed units, to be affordable. Well, what does affordability mean? And so we use these income limits to determine affordability. On this particular slide, it's really showing what our affordability levels are. So when you think about the basic incomes needed, this is what drives the IHO. So once again, IHO is a policy. You still have to have program elements to implement that policy. So this becomes a very critical piece of actually implementing your IHO. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. Next slide. So once again, context. I just showed you the slides of area median incomes. These are jobs in our community today. These are the salaries that are paid in our community. If you go to the very far right column, you can see the income category for a household of one that these salaries match up. So those first three positions are very low income, and we only have a couple thousand units available in our community that someone can afford either as a rental or ownership. So you can see there is a mismatch of wages relative to the cost of housing. This is also why having an IHO is extremely important. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our RENA goals that were given to our community. So for folks that aren't aware, RENA goals, regional housing needs allocation, are established and allocated to every city in California. And these are our targets. So over our housing cycle, we're supposed to be targeting 1,000 units broken out by those income categories. The permits we have issued today show where we are relative to our goal. So we've already met our goal for low income. We've permitted units in the low income category. A big part of why we're getting some success here is an inclusionary housing ordinance. It is creating affordability at these levels through the IHO policy. So we are on track, and we're only a couple years into this cycle. We are definitely on track to to meet our goals. So an IHO can really be helpful in achieving your local allocation or your local goals as it relates to RENA. Next slide. Um, we are very fortunate. We do have a lot of projects in the pipeline. This is just a sampling of the housing that is currently being permitted in our community. We have a lot of development. Uh, Cities in the southern part of Santa Clara County do have a little bit more room to grow or greenfield development opportunities. And you can see a lot of ownership product is being built as well as rental. So having an IHO allows us to capture from each one of these projects a certain amount of units that are going to be deemed affordable because we have the development. Next slide. So really the basics of Morgan Hill's inclusionary housing ordinance. It was adopted in 2018. I would be remiss if I didn't share with folks Morgan Hill was very unique in Santa Clara County. In the 1970s, the residents here actually brought forward an initiative to do a growth control measure, and that limited the number of housing units that would be developed each year. As part of that process, within about 10 years of doing that process, the community really recognized we need to build affordable housing. That was our early version of an IHO, where we started doing 30-year deed restrictions as part of issuing permits. So come 2018, as different state legislations changing, the city adopted the inclusionary housing ordinance. What does that mean in Morgan Hill? So if you are building more than 2 units, you trigger the IHO policy. If you're located within the downtown area, you have a 10% requirement. That means 10% of the units need to be deemed affordable. If you're doing a project outside of downtown, the requirement is 15%. The levels of affordability depend on whether it's rental or ownership. And I've showed on the slide the deed restriction that goes along with those requirements. Something that Josh said, and I want to highlight this, which is kind of unique to our code. One, part of doing inclusionary is making sure that we aren't saying this is affordable housing that exists over in this corner and this is all market rate. We want it to be fully integrated into a development. So when we say you have to set aside units, you have to have them dispersed throughout the development. You cannot isolate them into one particular area, and they need to be proportional. So if you're doing a range of unit sizes and mixes, they need to be spread fairly equally in those unit mixes. The other thing I want to make sure I communicate, because Josh did flag this in his presentation, we require the development to occur concurrently. You cannot build market and then do your affordable at the end. You have to do them concurrently. So as the project comes on in phases, there might be 6 market rate, 1 BMR. The next might be 8 units with 2 BMRs included in them, below market rate affordable units. So it needs to be integrated completely into the project as the project goes along. We do allow for projects by right to fee out. So we do have an in lieu fee. So any project can fee out up to 50% of their obligation. So if your obligation is 8 units, you can fee out on 4, but you still have to build 4. If you want a 100% fee out and don't want to build any units, that does require us to go to city council and get their feedback. I'm going to stay here for a quick second on this slide, which is to say there are reasons why we would want to do a fee out, and having that flexibility in our inclusionary housing ordinance is built in. Something to think about as a city, as we work to our arena goals, we might actually hit some of our targets. So do we need to continue to force the building where maybe having the fee and capturing the fee will allow us to work with the County of Santa Clara, a nonprofit developer or a profit developer, and build units that get us close to our goal on extremely low income. So there are some decision points that allow us to flex funds in a way that achieves all the goals or the targets of the arena. So having some flexibility is actually very important. Next slide. So really, how has the IHO been happening? Right now, once again, partly due to the residential development control system and the IHO, 1 of every 6 units in Morgan Hill is considered affordable by design. Our program has nearly 600 units, both ownership and rental, that are deed restricted, meaning your your mortgage cost is restricted or your rental fee is restricted. one of the things that in capturing those fees, we've been able to partner with the county on actually two very important projects in our community that are 100% affordable, supporting farm workers, supporting veterans. So capturing those in lieu fees allow for those great partnership opportunities with some of our local developers as well as the county and the city putting money into those developments. Lastly, the IHO helped us negotiate through two builder remedy projects that we had in our community. One of the elements of this resulted in the city getting deeded 5 acres of land that we will now be able to control and work with a partner in developing affordable housing and kind of guiding the type of affordable housing that we'd like in our community. Next slide. So I did want to talk about some of the lessons learned having an IHO, and I'm happy to get into more detail of this. Obviously, I would love to tackle questions from folks as I'm rounding out my slides here. So one is keeping in mind the IHO, once again, gets you the units. You then have to actually get those units to market. And how do you keep control of those units? And so this is where you get into program challenges. One of the things that's not really contemplated in IHOs is what happens when an owner buys a unit and dies. How do you keep that unit still affordable and not going into market rate? So there's doing the policy and then there's the program side that you need to be very mindful. One thing that Josh didn't talk about in terms of the overview, once again, on the program side, interest rates impact affordable housing. When interest rates are high, the cost of money is higher, your money goes less farther. That means the pricing of units has to be lower. Once again, we work by the income limit tables. When interest rates are low, that allows your money to go farther, which allows for sales prices and rents to go higher. Well, when you have a market change, like we just did, you change the pricing of affordable units. And that can actually have an upside to a developer or a downside to a developer. And I want to kind of wrap up, but I'm happy to go back to these questions. The other one I want to flag for folks is our in lieu fee right now is on a livable square footage rate. And we did an analysis and we update that fee by CPI every year. That fee right now is $23.18 per square foot. I had a project recently that was doing 16 units. So at a 15% inclusionary requirement that required them to build 2.4 units of affordable housing. You're not going to build a zero point 0.4 unit. You're going to build two and you're going to fee out on the 0.4. That fee out on that two generates $500,000. That $500,000 to build a moderate, two moderate units actually exceeds what we're collecting. So to Josh's other point is right sizing the fee because we may collect the fee, but we may not be building for another 2 or 3 years. Um, those are things we don't quite capture so well when we do in lieu fees and making sure that, you know, this trade-off between building now, capturing funds to build later, there needs to be some adjustments that go on that aren't really captured in IHO. So I'm going to end there, leaving time for questions. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, great. So with that, we're going to get into the Q&A section of our discussion. And let's see here. First question is kind of a doozy. So they're referring to the state density bonus law, which already allows developers to increase project yield when they provide affordable units that meet cities' inclusionary requirements. Since many cities make you choose between the state density bonus or their local bonus, what other tools or incentives can cities offer to make projects more feasible? And then feel free, either one of you, if you have like responses or thoughts.
So I think, the lesson we're learning is because we do have an inclusionary housing ordinance at 15%, it automatically for projects creates that density bonus. Like it's a catch 22, right? Um, but I will say in most cases, at least here in our community right now, a vast majority of the developers are building it because the return on investment makes sense and it does pencil. Um, we are seeing the one thing about density bonuses, we are now seeing a great deal of requests for waivers. And pretty much under the law, you can allow unlimited waivers. So there are ways of offsetting some of the costs. Concessions, you're still somewhat limited, um, but right now this hasn't been a pinch point. But by having an IHO, we automatically for our projects create density bonus just because we have that requirement.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add that in terms of what can cities do, there's two ways to think about it. What can you do for the market rate units, and what can you do to get more affordable units? The market rate unit, and what's in the control of cities is, at the end of the day, the main thing is zoning and approval. So make sure your zoning is something that the market really wants to build, up zone where it makes sense, and then just have more certainty. I know the state really pushes this, but that's super powerful. If the developer doesn't have to spend 6 months, a year, 2 years getting approval, and if they know they're going to get approved, the everyone, they'll accept a lower profit threshold. They're more likely to bid more on they're more likely to buy land. Everything goes better if cities can do that. And then there's some things that are really painful for cities. Like if I'm like, oh well, raise tax on businesses to pay for affordable housing. That's really painful. But the playing with the zoning and the approval process, that's something that doesn't cost the cities anything. It's something you should. It's the most powerful tool cities have. I mean, in terms of the what the cities can do to get more affordable housing, the main thing is raising money. So different strategies to ensure that you have enough money. It could be a fee, commercial impact fee. It could be using some of the hotel tax. There's some creative no-cost strategies. I'm a real fan of giving affordable housing developers extra zoning privileges. So instead of just upzoning an area, if you want to upzone it only for affordable housing developers. If you want to let ADUs be sold separately, give that privilege only to nonprofits that are keep those prices moderate. So those are some strategies outside of actually raising additional revenue.
Okay. Thank you both. Another question we had, why do profits that developers say they need vary from as low as 7.5% on some developments like apartments to as high as 25% for townhomes or larger single-family homes?
It's a good question. They don't really. The fine print of that chart showed that those are different ways of measuring profit. So you could measure it as return on investment. You could, which is obviously there's a lot less investment cash that goes in. You could measure it as profit as a percentage of total development costs. Then that percentage will be lower. It's not the rental developers and the owner developers, they just kind of measure profit, talk about profit a little differently. So those two numbers don't translate.
Okay. Very specific question for Morgan Hill. How many inclusionary projects have been completed? I'm assuming I'm not sure if they're saying inclusionary units on site or 100% affordable units, but if you have both information, that'd be great. And have there been any issues or problems with their operations after completion due to certain economic
Excellent question. So the quick tidbit I have at the top of my head. So in the last uh, 2.5 years, we've had 13 projects triggering inclusionary housing ordinance that have generated 128 affordable units. So um, so um, I'm happy to go back and dive a little bit deeper, but that was a quick factoid I had to look up for another purpose. So that's top of mind. Um, the challenges, honestly, that I've seen in the IHO, one really had to do with the way, so as a policy, we say we have a set aside, or a developer will set aside so many units. We execute an agreement with the developer for that purpose. In the agreements, we state what the pricing is when that document is executed. But within that legal agreement, we also say these prices are subject to change. So this is what the pricing is in 2002 when you executed the document. We're now in 2025. You've built the project and you are now marketing it and trying to sell these ownership units as affordable. And your agreement says you can sell it for 846,000. Well, believe it or not, in 2022, when interest rates were so low and we have such a high area median income, believe it or not, 846,000 at a moderate level was deemed affordable. Have that blow your mind for a minute. But it's now 2025. That affordability level is now 615,000. Developer has gone in and had all these assumptions built into their pro formas, loans, thinking that was the pricing. And now all of a sudden, a couple years later, they are in this process of, wait a minute, that's a big delta for us. Um, those are where things don't align. The flip side of that is also true. Had they had we put in 2022, it's going to be 615,000, and now interest rates go down and you can sell it for this. That's huge upside. So it's hard to kind of address that, but the interest rate is what affects ultimately the how much you can sell something for. So there's this dynamic that happens outside the IHO that is an unknown. And so this is where you go from policy to program. And that's where we have to kind of figure things out. The last thing I will say, because of our community, more specifically, it may resonate with others. You know, in our housing element that got adopted, and I've seen some things in the chat, you know, how do we start to maybe focus on creating more housing uh, opportunities for folks with disabilities and really making that an area of focus. Thinking about areas that are RCAAs, racially concentrated areas of influence. How do we start to use that as a policy tool to start to shift where we get affordable housing in other areas of our city? And so those are the kinds of tweaks as a living policy we need to think about. And that's the work we're doing now.
I see. Thank you.
I just want to tag on to John's example. So remember how I was saying that developers will pay less for land based on all their costs and the sales price. In John's example, where they thought they were going to be able to sell a unit, an inclusionary unit for 800, and they only got to sell it for 600,000, they have no way to make up that cost. If they had known that ahead of time, they would have adjusted whatever they were going to pay for land, adjusted what product they were going to build. The developers that hate inclusionary the most are the ones that have already bought their land and already halfway through the entitlement process when the requirements go in. And often, if you're adding an inclusionary program for the first time, it's nice to grandfather those in, because those developers, they'll just lose. They might go bankrupt, like if you put in a really big requirement that they hadn't planned when they started bidding on that land.
Well, thank you both, specifically for your expertise on the subject matter, for answering the audience questions, and for joining us today. I'm realizing we are out of time, and there's a lot of good questions that unfortunately we're not going to get to answer. But again, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out to SK at Home. Josh, John, is it okay if they email you as well?
For
Awesome.
sure.
And yeah, with that, we're actually going to be closing out. So we have a call to action. It's very timely, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Allison Singolani, our Director of Policy, for more information.
Thanks so much, and thank you, John and Josh, for such a wonderful and rich conversation. If we could get the slides back up, please. I want to talk to you a little bit about what's about to happen in the city of San Jose. So the San Jose City Council in November will be considering some changes to their inclusionary housing ordinance that would actually result in most of the units being produced above the market average rents with these proposals. So right now, about 2/3 of inclusionary housing units are below market average, ensuring that they're delivering a real public benefit. The proposed amendment would turn that on its head, with most units above market average delivering really minimal public benefit. So the graph on the right there is the proposed, the graph on the left is the current. So market rents in San Jose are around 70% AMI right now. We know from experiences in other cities in the Bay Area that units as high as 110% are more likely to sit vacant, providing housing to no one when they're deed restricted. There's nothing worse in the middle of a housing crisis than having a vacant unit just sitting there. Market rate units are really kind of the impetus for this. We want to make it easier to build market rate units. That's important because they meet the needs of a large proportion of our population, but cities are also legally required to assist in the development of adequate housing to meet the needs, I'm quoting here, of extremely low, very low, low, and moderate income households, not just produce more housing units at any cost. Almost half of San Jose's residents have incomes below 80% of AMI, about 45%. As the city has redirected Measure E, which has historically been a great source of funding for the subsidy of affordable housing, to address other needs, and the county's 2016 Measure A housing bond has been successfully deployed, IHO in lieu fees provide an important source of funds to subsidize deeply affordable housing. That's to the tune of $47 million since the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance came into being in 2019. I'll also say that even given our really challenging economic environment, the current IHO in San Jose is effective. So in addition to in lieu fees, the IHO has delivered an average of 288 new affordable homes each year, almost the same as the number of affordable homes the city subsidizes directly each year, effectively doubling the city's share of affordable housing production. In fact, just a few days ago, again, even in our current very challenging economic environment, we saw news coverage of a new development at San Jose's Berryessa BART station with 708 new homes, including 260 units of affordable housing under the AMIs of the current IHO. It's working. We also know that because there's a lot of vacancy at these higher area median incomes, market rate developers don't want and can't afford vacant units because they're not going to do anything to help feasibility or help that pro forma pencil out. There's also the burden on developers and residents of income certification, which is an annual process. It's time consuming and pretty invasive. How hard will it be for developers to chase down and go through this process with tenants who can afford to compete in the open market? Finally, the current menu of compliance options in San Jose's IHO, which also includes options like dedicating land for affordable housing, gives developers flexibility and helps them find the option that will let each unique development pencil. Next slide, please. So here's our call to action. We would like you, please, to call your San Jose council member and mayor and let them know we want to maintain current affordability in the inclusionary housing ordinance. You can also attend the council meeting. It's tentatively scheduled for November 18th to speak out about this. Keep an eye out for our newsletter coming next week, where we'll share more information on this, more details, and give you some helpful talking points that you can use. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Manuel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Allison. So thank you everyone for having attended today. If you're interested in our upcoming PIA, we're going to be talking about fair rental bills, understanding rent and utility regulations in San Jose. We have a QR code here that you can scan, and if you're a part of our listserv, we will be sending out information around that and how you can, join us. Next slide, please. And stay connected with us. We host monthly events. We have a ton of different newsletter content that goes out. We try to equitably advocate for affordable housing across Santa Clara County, and we would love for you to be a part of the movement. So if you're interested in becoming a member, please do sign up. And if you're interested in joining our newsletter, if you still haven't, well, that is wonderful as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our two, guest speakers, and we hope everyone has a wonderful day. So thank you everyone.